as always, I've got too much content and not enough time, so we're just going to get into it, right? 2 weeks ago, Pastor Tony talked about change, growth, and pain. Last Sunday, or the Sunday before Mother's Day, the pastor talked about changing seasons, right? Then Wednesday of last week, Pastor Eric and Gina talked about growth and thought processes and how destructive one thought can be. And then at the men's retreat, Reggie Hunt, he talked about outgrowing your container, and he talked about the power of thought and how one thought could change the world. All right. So before any of that ever happened, I already had my skeleton of this message, right? And guess what I'm talking about tonight? I'm talking about growth, change. I'm talking about thoughts and mind. Okay? Sounds like someone may be trying to tell us something, right? If you're wearing a tinfoil hat, you might think it's the government. I think it's Him, all right? God. I think He is trying to give us a message. And I think He is trying to give us a message because we are approaching changing times. And I told Chris, I just hear him saying this whenever church done lost its mind. All right, that's what I hear when I came up with this. But we're approaching, not only have we changed, but we're approaching another change. Pastor Tony asked me why I had an interest in apologetics, and my answer is just simply this: because our culture demands it. It's a necessity. All right. So we are going now in what they're labeling a post-Christian society. I hope that jars you. I hope that makes your heart ache. What does it mean? It means that now Christianity is no longer the dominant belief system. It's no longer what everyone is looking at as the standard. In fact, it is in decline. I don't think we felt the effects of it yet. I think, how there's a breaking point to everything. And you have to get to this certain, it's like with the melting of the ice, you have to get to this certain temperature before it shifts. And then all of a sudden you start to see change happen. And I'm afraid we have not started to see that yet. We are in a time where the millennial generation, and as a reference, that's roughly the ages of 20 to 40. These are people who are stepping up into leadership now, stepping into their roles now. And they are the largest generation in history. That says a lot. The largest generation in history. And I was hearing 15% of them were Christians, but now I'm hearing a new number, and what I keep hearing now is 5%. This is a big shift. This is a big shift coming. Things that we're used to are changing. And I want to talk a little bit about a post-Christian society and what that means, and just a few points here. One, it means they've heard the gospel and they've rejected it. You're not talking about someone who has never heard about Jesus. Overall, you're talking about people who have heard and they just simply said no. Most have thoughtful reasons for their rejection. All right? They've considered it, and they have something driving that decision. We need to find out what it is. Many are willing to convince others to reject it. They will make converts, and they will make them quickly. And the church is going to sit in the sanctuary and watch it happen. We have to engage. We have to take their objections seriously. How do we do that? How do we go forward in this new society, in this new landscape that the church is facing? And that's a difficult question. But we do know one thing. We know one thing, right? If you see a turtle sitting on a fence post, it didn't get there by himself. Y'all know that, right? I've got a quote by a doctor. Look, if you see a turtle on a fence post, you'd be rational to conclude that it didn't. Uh-oh. Sorry, Pastor, I know you like this phrase. I did ask him permission before I did this, okay? Just so y'all know. Did y'all know turtles could climb fences? They can climb fences, and somebody might say, well, that's one turtle. Maybe it's just a fluke. And there's There's another turtle. But he'll end up there eventually. He'll get to the fence post. So, I just changed some people's season right there. Some people are just messed up. Y'all are going to go home tonight, and y'all aren't going to know what to do tomorrow. All right? Y'all are going to wake up and say, turtles climb fences. I thought my yard was safe. You're going to walk out, there's a snapping turtle at your front door, and you're like, I have a fence. All right? So I just messed somebody up. All right, so what do we do? Because that one thing that we knew, right? That one thing that we knew is being challenged. Because we knew a turtle's not going to be on a fence post unless somebody put him there. It's being challenged. How do we deal with that? And just because you're being challenged, let me say this, just because you're being challenged does not mean you're wrong. But are you right? All right? That's a whole different question. You can say, oh, I'm not wrong. But are you right? That's right. Do you know why you're right? Have you thought about it like this new generation coming through? Do you have a good reason to believe that you're right? And in that process of answering that question, we may find some areas that need to be challenged. We may find some areas that need to be changed. When I was a kid, my parents took me to the jockey lot. And when I went, I must have been 4 or 5. I had to be, because if not, the story is pretty embarrassing. But I was at the jockey lot, and I saw this toy, and it was a tauntaun. And some of you are probably going, what in the world is a tauntaun? I didn't know what a tauntaun was either. That was really cool. That's a tauntaun from Star Wars, right? And this toy had this little ejector seat. It was supposed to come with Luke Skywalker, but nothing at the jockey lot ever has all the pieces, right? So it had this little ejector seat that did flip Luke off of there. But again, I didn't know it was from Star Wars. All I knew was this is awesome. And I took it home. I went I didn't take it home. I went to my grandmother's house. And my grandmother always had this chair. My grandpa had his chair. My grandmother had her chair. And they were always found in those chairs. And I remember, I can still see it in my mind. I walked up and I'm showing her this awesome toy. And she looks at it, she says, that's a bunch of bull hockey. Y'all know what bull hockey is, right? I mean, that's a southern term, I'm sure. But for the northerners in here, you can guess. It's bull hockey. Okay? And I remember that so vividly, and I must have asked something like, what is it? And she said, that's bull hockey. And my life was changed. From that day on, that was my bull hockey. That was what I called that toy for I don't know how long. This was my bull hockey. I remember that. That was horrible that I lived life that way. And I don't know when I actually learned what it was, but for a long time it was bull hockey. And here's the problem. If I take my tauntaun, if I take my bull hockey out to somebody else and I tell them, this is bull hockey, they're going to be like, no, that's not bull hockey. But Grandma said this is bull hockey. Wait a minute, I got lines I got to stay in. So they told me I'm going to get electric shock if I get outside the box. So here I am, I'm presenting this toy to someone else, and I'm saying, here, this is my grandma told me this was bull hockey. There's 2 things I want to take away from that. One, they don't know grandma. Your grandma might have told you, so she might have taught you something. She might have taught you something really good. Grandma's got no cred with these people, right? They don't know who grandma is. So we may not just be able to say, well, this is what grandma said. And the second thing is, grandma said it, but she never imagined that I would take it in the context that I took it in, right? I don't know what she was imagining when she told me that, but she wasn't imagining that I was going to adopt that as the name for this toy, right? So when you're going out and you're approaching people, you have to remember those things. What you believe, what you know, what you at your core have adopted. All right? those things don't mean anything to anybody else until you establish a reason for them to mean something to somebody else. All right? So, some things have changed. Some things need to change. And some things force change. I really wish I could talk with my other hand right now. All right. So, what is this process of change? This is a refining. Change can refine us. It can make us better. And one of the things, I love to listen to debates between Christian apologists and atheist naturalist speakers because the challenge to each other, and the atheists will say this too, the challenge that we get from each other drives us higher. It drives us further. Our understanding goes further, and it makes us better. So change is refining. Let me get off of Han Solo here for a second, and let's get to the Bible. Okay? Mark 12:30. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Now, how has the church changed? And how must the church change? I want to look at two elements here before I really get into what I want to talk about. Number one is love. Hey, I don't think y'all have ever used this before. Look. Love. And this love, y'all have heard agape, right? Y'all have heard agape love. This is in that same vein as agapeo, all right? It's I love this definition, actively doing what the Lord prefers. All right, I'm going to say it again. Actively doing what the Lord prefers. That is an awesome definition of that word love. So the next thing that I want to take away from this is that this is a picture of our whole being. All right, our heart, our soul, our mind, our strength. That's every part of us. So we're loving God with everything, with every part of us, because He made it all, right? He made it all for us to pour back into Him, to show that love back to Him. So with our whole being, we are actively doing what the Lord prefers. Now, I think the church has a pretty good handle on the heart and on the soul, all right? That's our emotion, that's our spirituality. We recognize that pretty good, right? And that's a big part of our faith. And then when it comes to strength, we're like, yeah, we recognize it, but we don't want to do it. That's our abilities. That's going out, and that's putting our faith into practice, right? We struggle with that one a little bit. And it seems like, though, this fourth one we have just completely shoved into a corner, and that is with our mind. And we have, I've got so many great quotes that I love to read you, and I don't have time, but I do want to try to read. I'm going to try to read two of them. I'm going to try to read one of them because I won't stay on track with two of them. All right, this is Ravi Zacharias, and this is a shortening of what he is saying, but he says Christians in the West began to reduce the message to the lowest level of cognition in the audience. Before long, evangelicals were seen to be masters in entertainment and minimalists in thought. As this was happening, the intellectual arenas were being plundered, and young minds gradually driven away from their faith. Christians are paying our dues today. And this is the part right here. This is the kicker. And likely will for an entire generation. An entire generation. And we see that, don't we? What I was talking about with the millennials, 5% are Christians. We can see that. An entire generation. And that's if we do something about it now. If we keep going on the same way we've been going, what about the children of that generation? The grandchildren. We're talking about your children, your grandchildren, right? Your family. How do we change the way the church has been doing business so that we can try in this new landscape to reach these people? And I'm going to get into that. First, let's go back to this word mind a little bit. John Calvin said, "What is the difference between the mind and the heart, both in this passage and in Matthew? I do not trouble myself to inquire, except that I consider the mind to denote the loftier abode of reason from which all thought and deliberation flows." And listen to some of this. This is from Strong's word study here. This is the definition of this word dianoia that's being used in this verse. It says, literally, thorough reasoning. I'm going to mess with some of you here. Incorporating both sides of a matter to reach a meaningful conclusion. It says, such full-breadth reasoning is essential to loving the Lord our God and our neighbor. It is also the instrument of self-destruction when exercised without God's light and power. This isn't just some word that got thrown in here with all of our mind. This is God saying, I want all of you. I made all of you. I made your heart, I made your soul, and I made your strength. I also made your mind. And sometimes the church likes to treat that like it's too dangerous to handle. Yeah. And it is outside of God's redemptive work. What it just said here, the destruction that can come from that outside of using it in God's glory. And we do recognize the mind in some aspects. We say, I've got to guard my mind. I can't think about this. I can't do that. I can't. You think maybe He made it for something other than I can't? All right. Maybe He made it to do something. But we've pushed it aside and we've forgotten that our minds are there for God's glory as well. Do you know when the scientific revolution began, when all of these founders like Isaac Newton, almost all of them were Christian. And we've lost that. The great thinkers of the past, so many, and think about things like schools and hospitals and things like that. It was spurred by the church. But all these academic and all these things that came about from our minds, from our mental and our reasoning capacities, all right, all those things are part of it too. And now we live in a place where we've been overwhelmed by the way the world used the mind, so we just say, oh, no more. I'm not going to use my mind. I'm just going to rely on my heart, on my feelings, on my spirituality. And when we do that, and I hear people talk about that, I don't see any difference between that and my pagan friends. It's all about the feeling. It's all about the heart. So, okay? And I want you to catch it. I have pagan friends. Self-proclaimed pagan friends, okay? I'm not using that term loosely. I have friends. Well, that came out wrong. Some of you may find that a shock as well, but I have friends, but they are friends who aren't Christian friends. And sometimes we talk about things that are hard to talk about. We discuss things. I keep wanting to say to cuss. But to cuss things. Yeah? But it's important. I want to make sure that I'm connecting these things here. That from the importance of the mind and the application of the mind. All right? You see, we have to have conversations with people. But there are certain conversations we don't want to have. And I think a lot of it's because we don't know how to have those conversations. Right? And a lot of that's because we haven't really thought about what we would say if we were asked certain questions. And in fact, one of the things that I hear a lot of times from people who have left the church is, no one could answer my questions. And that's sad. No one can answer my questions. And when you get to that place where you can't answer questions, it's probably because you've never really thought about what questions to ask. You've never taken the time to consider that there are questions, or have taken the time to listen to what other people's questions are. And it's time that we start doing that. Before I go any farther in that train of thought, I want to read some verses to you that have to do with this word dianoia and what it means to us scripturally. Because I want you to understand, I'm not trying to push intellectualism. Right? And that's what the church is afraid of a lot of times, I think. We're afraid of getting too intellectual. And I can drift too far on that side. And I've got some people in here that help ground me and pull me back, all right, into that heart, that spirit. What I'm suggesting is that we find that balance of our entire being. We find that balance of how the heart works with the mind and the mind works with the soul. And all of these inspire us to use our strength and our abilities. I'm talking about us as a whole person trying to understand how to love God by actively doing what He desires. So don't misunderstand me when I'm talking a lot about the mind. It's just because we've neglected it. I want a whole picture of who God intended us to be. And in doing that, we want to look at Hebrews. In both chapter 8 and 10, they both are very similar, and I'm just going to say it like this. This is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my laws on their heart. And we know that one, right? He put a new law on our heart. He put a law on our heart. We'll say that all the time. God, He redeemed our hearts. He's renewed our hearts. Listen to that next sentence. It says, and write them on their minds. This is the redemptive work of Jesus Christ. This is Him saying, I paid a price for you. And it was for your heart. And it was for your soul. And it was to waken your spirit up. But I paid for all of it. I paid for your mind. I paid for your understanding. For your loftier abode of reasoning. For your ability to think. And then we go on to 1 Peter 1, 12 through 14. It says, it was revealed to them, the prophets, that they were serving not themselves, but you, in things that have now been announced to you through those who preach the good news to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven. All right? Our gospel of salvation coming from the Holy Spirit, coming from heaven to you. And it says this, it says, things into which angels long to look. We've got something special here. We've got something to which angels long to look. And then he says, therefore, all right, it means because of this, because of what He did, the redemptive work, the redemption of the heart, of the soul, of the mind, of the strength, because of what Jesus did on the cross, and it all goes back to that. I don't care if you get your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength in the right place or not. If it's not all turning back to love the Lord, you're not getting anywhere. Okay, you've got to have that element. So don't let me lose Jesus in the cross and all of this, because that's what it's all about. There's no point to it if it's not there. So keep that in mind. I want you to see that. But therefore, because these things came through the Holy Spirit, because they came to us through the prophets, therefore, preparing your minds for action. Preparing your dianoia, your reasoning, your thorough, from this side to that side, examination of what's going on around you. Because we have been redeemed, because God purchased it all, we take that and now we prepare ourselves. We don't just wait for it to hit. Lord, give me the words to speak to them tonight. The pastor wouldn't let me speak up here very often if I didn't prepare. But if I just came up here and, well, maybe tonight let's see what I'm going to talk about. I know what. Y'all, well, no, not that one. Okay, he wouldn't let me speak very often if I didn't prepare. We are called to prepare, to go out. To go out. And he says, being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions, the heart effect. Do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. Okay? Ignorant. So He didn't want you to be ignorant in being conformed. And he definitely don't want you to go after the heart, all the heart, and go back into previous passions before you conform. All right? So we, again, are finding this balance. We're using our minds and we're using our hearts, and all of that's coming to undergird our spirits. And then we look at Romans 12, 1 and 2. It says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed by this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The renewing of your mind. And in this verse, it uses a different word. This isn't dianoia. This is nos. All right, so it's a little bit different. But listen to what nos means. The God-given capacity of each person to think, the mind, mental capacity to exercise reflective thinking.
All right.
And it says, for the believer, the mind is the organ of receiving God's thoughts through faith. What I'm trying to paint a picture here is that through that redemptive work of Christ, He redeemed your mind. He took it back for Himself. And now that it belongs to Him, He's given you a new capacity, a new capability to handle thoughts, to handle wisdom that you couldn't understand before. And now He's prepared your mind as a fertile soil, as a receiving ground. Right? But like Peter said, we have to prepare. Right? We're responsible for cultivating. Your mind is a very interesting thing. It's a very interesting place. You have new thoughts and new actions. Something that you've never heard, never considered, never done before. And when that happens, all of a sudden your brain shoots a new little channel out. Something that wasn't there before. It creates a new pathway. And then you use it again, and that pathway deepens. And you use it again, and it deepens. And so all of a sudden, this pathway that you did naturally travel, it starts to divert and go this direction through the way our minds work. It's like a water that flows and washes out the sediment. It carves new landscapes. And so when we start to do things, I want you to understand, I started studying some of this stuff, and after 3 minutes, my head hurt. And I said, what? I didn't understand any of that. And then I listened to it again, and maybe I made it about 5 minutes before my head started to hurt. And I said, well, no, wait a minute. I think I understand a little bit of what he's saying here. You see what I'm carving a new path. I'm having new thoughts. I'm building. I'm not going, well, I just didn't know that, and I'll never know that. And God didn't give me that kind of brain. I'm sculpting what He's given me. I'm using the capacity of what He's given me. And just because the Saluda River takes 4 times the amount of water that the Reedy River does, it doesn't mean the Reedy River doesn't need to flow. I'm not asking you to be Einstein. Somebody say, if we're looking on the scale, I'm more of the Gomer Pyle. Okay, that's fine. Everybody loved Gomer Pyle. Yeah, he had gifts. I'm not asking you to be an Einstein, but what I'm asking you is to let the living water that is inside of you to flow in a way that it carves out new channels and new landscapes in your mind. All right? So that you just wash out that sediment and you go as deep as you can until you hit bedrock. It might not be as deep as other people. That's okay. You're flowing in your capacity, and that's what God wants with all of your being. Not all of my being, not all of His being, not all of her being, all of your being. You're loving the Lord your God. And He wants you to cultivate your mind for that purpose. Don't push it into a corner and say, that's just not, God didn't want that. Or I don't have the ability to do that. He has given you the ability. He made a marvelous thing, and He intended for it to be useful. And now that you're redeemed, He intends it all the more to be useful. So we take the mind and we begin to cultivate it. How do we do that? You can read, you can listen to stuff. That's great. But, I've found that if you can't answer a question when it's been asked to you, if you can't explain what you believe, you don't have a firm grip on what you believe. You haven't exercised that thought process to really know, do I really believe this? Is this just something I'm repeating like a parrot? Okay? So what I'm telling you is start asking questions. Get around people who will ask questions. If you're nervous about the mind, get around other Christians and start asking questions. Or better yet, start finding questions that other people ask and start asking each other those questions. And start to cultivate a new thought process, a new understanding. Start to understand some of the stuff that people are going through. That way you can have conversations with them. Because reading and all that's great, but if we don't apply it, if we don't start having conversations, it's for nothing. And that's what this world needs. It needs conversations. It needs us to reach out to people who aren't like us, to ask and answer questions and just share something with each other. And real quick, because I've got to wrap up here. Just a few weeks ago, I was sitting down with a guy at lunch, and he said, "You guys, if you want to pray, go ahead and pray. Don't feel ashamed." All right, so we go on and we're eating, and I said, "Well, he brought it up. I mean, I'm at work, but that's taboo." But I said, he brought it up, so I said, "So since you brought it up, what is your faith?" He said, "I'm a Hindu." "Well, I'm a Hindu Christian." I said, "What's a Hindu Christian?" So he explains his beliefs to me. All right. So the Hindu, they believe there's one God, and then all of the other religions, they're just paths to that God. Everybody's right, is what basically it boils down to, and everybody's going to the same place. So he's explaining that to me, and he says something about they don't believe in literalities. I'm like, oh, okay, literalities. Let me hold on to that for a little bit. I said, but what do you do with the tougher things that Jesus said, like I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. He said, well, that's those literalities. If you feel like you need to evangelize because that's your path to God, then that's fine. That's right. Go ahead and do that. We support everybody doing their own thing. Now, he must have saw the question welling up inside of me because I start thinking 9/11, And he goes, "Oh, well, except for violence, we don't." Yeah. So I said, "So you do believe in literalities?" Well, just violence. I let him off the hook. I didn't say anything else to him about that. But guess what? Sitting quietly for a few minutes, he goes, "So what's your faith?" At this point in the conversation, I have not told him anything. I've asked questions. I've just asked questions. And then he asked me a question. Now I can talk to him. We're building relationships. That's another thing that actually Pastor Tony, he talked about going to that French restaurant. No, what was it, French? Yeah, French restaurant, Harday's. And I can't believe I repeated that, but he was talking about going, and he said he talked to this guy so that maybe one day he would come to church. Relationships, connections, asking questions. That's the way we're going to learn to reach people. Right. Having conversations, being out there, not being afraid for someone to challenge what you believe. Right. And you know what? I don't know is an acceptable answer. You say, I'm going to have to look at that. I'm going to have to study that and get back with you. Right. That's fine. That's fine. You're in a long-term relationship to move that person forward to Christ. Okay? It's not one and done. I've still got a relationship with this guy that I'm talking to. He didn't accept Christ that day. But I've got a relationship with him, and we can talk, and we can start to ask hard questions. Just be careful not to get in arguments. All right? You can you can make arguments in your conversation, but you can't make conversation in an argument. Okay? So don't get into arguments, but be open to talking and asking and just communicating with people, building relationships. That's how we're going to move forward. Millennials want relationships, and they want people to talk to them about things, about what they believe. They want to have these discussions. It's okay to do that. I am going to go ahead and just challenge you to begin to cultivate a new way of loving God with all of your being, including every part of it. Every part of you. Give it back to God. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn this over to the pastor. And while I do that, if Brandon will play a short video. It talks about a book here. I've never read the book, so I'm not endorsing it. I want to read the book because it's a good video. But watch this, and I'll hand it back to the pastor.